Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I parked illegally because I had to carry all this stuff in, so don't tow my Volkswagen Golf, okay, that I bought for my son so he can learn how to drive still. Okay, human trafficking. Who's here been to the other introductory seminars that we've done, or one of them, just so I feel, okay. So we have a couple new stats, not a lot. And so we're going to have just a quick intro this morning, get everybody that groundwork so we can have a really nice dive into investigation, case management, what this looks like in Vermont, and then a good discussion hopefully too between us. It's a good group. We're all energized. It's Tuesday. And capacity building. So that'll be in the discussion too, like who can do what. I understand there's some folks from the hospital here. Yeah? One? Okay. So just so you know, the UVM network, medical network has a anti-human trafficking collaborative as well. And we're doing work through the hospital and to all the community clinics and centers through that. And Crystal's on that collaborative. So we can talk after about your build up in there. Okay, let's start with the overview. So slavery. This is the umbrella term. Okay, you might have heard the term modern day slavery in the media recently, or done a little reading before you got here. So there are two recent researchers, both are good in their own way. Benjamin Skinner. A slave is a human being forced to work through fraud or threat of violence for no pay beyond subsistence. Okay? And then Kevin Bales, who's also done research around the globe. Slavery is the total control of one person by another for the purpose of economic exploitation. So what do all the fifth grade textbooks still kind of say? You know, slavery's been abolished globally and in our own country. And that's true on the books. There are laws abolishing it. But in fact, it has now turned into an underground crime that happens around the world. So what do the numbers look like? There are several out there. These are from the International Labor Organization. There's one out there that says 27 million people are enslaved. But really at 21 million, it's still a lot of people, right? So in this breakdown, we've got a total of 21 million. So that's men, women, and kids. And then it breaks it down into adults, children, female, and male. Okay, does anything in that breakdown surprise you? What you might...
21 million. 21 million is a huge number.
It is a huge number, yeah. And anything in the breakdown interesting?
The male population is so high.
Yeah, it's half, right? Right? But what gets talked about in the media all the time? 12-year-old girls and all that, right?
Even the adult population is so high.
Exactly. Okay? So now the ILO did another study, just released, and what they did was they started including forced marriage into a form of slavery. When they did that, and if you think about, we won't go deep into it, but think about what a forced marriage might look like and what's going on in that power dynamic, right? It usually is the husband, but not necessarily, but usually. So the numbers get a little bit, well, they're bigger, so we're up to 40 million people now. But when you break it down, it's still the same, around 21 million in the forced labor and sexual exploitation. So back to the 2012, where is this happening? Okay, what you might think, 12 million, right, in the Middle East and Asia. But what's the United States, Australia, and Europe? That all is purple. It's hard to see on the screen. Yeah, it's still 1.5 million people. Okay, so it is happening here. And this is the newer study, again, the breakdown of where it's going on. So again, you can see the difference when you include the forced marriage and how that changes a little bit. But in general, what's going on is the same trends are happening. So when you, that's the umbrella term, like I said. So now to meet the threshold of human trafficking, okay, I'll just read this out loud. Trafficking means recruiting, abducting, facilitating, transferring, harboring, or transporting a person by threat or use of force, coercion, fraud, or deception, by the purchase, sale, trade, transfer, or receipt of a person for the purpose of subjecting that person to involuntary servitude, peonage, slavery, slave-like practices, sex trafficking, or forced or bonded labor services. Okay, that's the meaty definition. Or simply, humans are trafficked utilizing force, and here's the important word to look at, or fraud, or coercion. Only one of those three tools needs to be utilized. And what is that perpetrator doing? They're commercially exploiting someone else. And it can be forced labor or sex. So when you bring in the element of the children or minors, okay, things can be a little different because you do not need force, fraud, or coercion if a minor is involved in commercial sex work, forced commercial sex work. Okay, those elements, you don't need any of those three elements. It's an automatic. And why do you think that's so? Right, it's a minor, right? And although it gets a little, Matt might talk about this a little bit, the age of consent in Vermont and how old you can be to be married and all these things can factor in. But in the federal law and the Vermont law, you don't need force, fraud, or coercion if there's commercial sex with a minor. So, the three categories of human trafficking victims. So, like we just said, those under 18 involved in commercial sex act, over 18 involved in commercial sex act through force, fraud, or coercion, or those forced into labor or services through force, fraud, again, or coercion, which is the hardest one. All right, so why is this going on? Why is this going on? Why does any crime happen for the most part, except for the money? Okay. So human trafficking is actually tied with arms dealing right now as the fastest growing. And there's one study out from 2007 that put that profit somewhere around 32 billion around the globe. And then a new one in 2016 at 150 billion. Either way, again, these numbers are very large and it's untaxable monies going to criminals. Okay? And they're preying on the most vulnerable. So, it's a reusable resource, a person, right? You think about that. If you're a drug dealer or an arms dealer, what do you have to do? Keep going and re-upping your supply. But if you have a person and you get them into a spot, either through force, fraud, or coercion, and then keep manipulating them through any of those or a combination of those tools, you can reuse them over and over and over again. And there are little things that you need to do to keep that person in subsistence. You might have to bring them in to see a physician or a healthcare provider at some point. You have to feed them and house them to a certain degree, but you can keep using them over and over again. So you have a low risk because you just got this person that's in your control, and a high yield because they're going out and working, whether it's in an agricultural situation or in sex work, and we'll go into that in a second. Also, trafficking isn't always seen as a crime, right? Or it's not seen at all, and it's difficult to prove. The Polaris Project down in DC runs a national hotline number, and they do a little bit of research, and their tagline is "Look beneath the surface." Okay, so what you see might not be really what's going on behind the scenes. All right, and then I just like to tag this in somewhere along the way is the difference between trafficking and smuggling. All right, So immigration issues aside, we can take a whole semester-long class on immigration and cross our fingers that at some point the world is going to figure out how to make this like equitable and fair to everybody. In the meantime, smuggling happens. So what is smuggling? It's when a person of their own fruition decides that they want to go from their country to another country, even though they don't have their documentation, and work. Okay? And they might want to bring family, they might want to go on their own, but usually the point is to gain employment. Okay? And it's my personal belief that most people just want to work and provide for themselves and or their families. And so, but when they have economic strife and they have no other options, they might opt to be smuggled. And when they have to smuggle themselves, usually they need help. And that comes in the form of what is called a coyote. If they're coming from Central America, and there's some other word for Asian, I can't remember what it is. Either way, they get this contractor, right, who's an expert at getting people over borders to get false documents or just help with transportation or hide them somewhere. And there is a fee involved. So that person pays this coyote a fee. The going rate is around $3,000 right now. And they say, yes, I want to go to the United States. My cousin's up in California picking strawberries. He told me that there's a place for me. I want to do this. And that's what goes on. Is that a crime against the state of the United States? Yes. Okay? It's a crime against the country. Not supposed to do it. Happens anyway. However, if the rules of the game change for that person, all right, if all of a sudden the coyote says, no, I was going to charge you $3,000, guess what? I'm going to take all your wages, because I know the farmer, until you pay off $7,000 to me. And you thought you were going to be working 10 hours a day at $9 an hour, guess what? You're going to be making $8 an hour, working 16 hours a day, and farmer's going to be taking your living expenses off the top every week. And maybe you'll get paid, maybe you won't, on a weekly basis. So as soon as the rules of the game change, or again, force, so that's more like the fraud and coercion thing, or there's force involved, because sometimes people have been physically threatened, it turns into a trafficking situation. So just like other crimes that can be perpetrated against undocumented people here, whether it's domestic violence, or they get mugged, or beat up, whatever, as soon as a crime happens against an undocumented person, there are remedies, because the United Nations that we are a part of has a Declaration of Human Rights, and no person should be subjected to a crime. So, if that happens, whether it's trafficking or another crime, an undocumented person can come forward and report to police, and they're supportive and get services for the person, and then there are immigration remedies to help the person, and then also help with the investigation. Okay, so it can get really complicated, but I always like to talk about that. Alright, so here's the thicker definition too. So these are all the actions that can be used with the force, fraud, or coercion for all those purposes. And again, what's your result? Commercial exploitation. Okay, so what are the forms? So we used to talk about the two silos, and we will, just to keep it simple for discussion today, of sex trafficking and labor trafficking. But really in the national conversation and international conversation, it's like, why are we even separating them? Okay, because sex work is work, and sometimes both things are happening. You could have a labor situation where the person's also having to do sex work. So we're starting to wrap it all together now. So we've got domestic service, so that's your maids, nannies, gardeners, that sort of thing. Criminal activity, such as gangs and theft, drug dealing, restaurant work, construction. That usually happens not so much in Vermont, but in places around the world where a lot of things have to be built in a short period of time, and so there isn't a lot of regulation or checks and balances with that, so people take advantage. Factories, peddling. Peddling can happen within a gang situation or just some underground company where they're enticing vulnerable people who don't have any other options to go out on the street and peddle, or even try to sell magazines and beg. Farm workers, like we talked about. Massage parlors, again, an overlap maybe between sex work and labor, okay? Right, so you do the massage and maybe some extra stuff, and it can all get wrapped together. All right, what's an example of a labor trafficking case? So this happened in Pennsylvania, and everybody refers to it as the Box Brothers case. They're from Yugoslavia, and what happened was they came in to Pennsylvania with legitimate papers, and they set up shop in Pennsylvania, a cleaning company, okay? And they started recruiting back home to get people to come and work for them. And they were able to grow very quickly because what they started to do was put in bids to companies, and their bid was quite low. And then they were getting the contract. And why was that happening? Because the people that they recruited from back home weren't being paid, they were being threatened and beat up. They were living in an apartment all together, like I think there were like 8 of them. And so the profit margin, or the contract fee to who they were winning the bids from was so much lower, and everyone was like, yeah, sign me up, I want to use this company, it's so much cheaper for us. We can't even pay our own employees to clean up. We're just going to hire this subcontractor. So guess where they were getting these bids from, or awarded from? That's right, Walmart and Target. So the stores. Right? And they even had some of these folks working in the stores during the store hours while customers were walking around. But because they were so scared for themselves, or their families back home were also being threatened, they did not say anything. And a good Samaritan gave in a tip. So that other silo, sex trafficking, and this one, I mean, we all know, pretty much how this can work. So what I'm going to do is read the caption. And this is from the newspaper a few years ago, just because the language in the caption is interesting and something to discuss. So here we are, a little house, double-decker, and it's a federal crackdown on a Queens sex trafficking ring targeted at an alleged brothel in this house in Poughkeepsie, as well as sites in Yonkers and Newburgh. Prostitutes are often driven in from Queens to one of the brothels, where they may stay for a week and sleep with dozens of men in a single night. Okay? So what's the media got going on that's good? Yep, the shock, and they say sex trafficking right away. So they're starting to talk about it.
Well, the language sleep is very disturbing. We're not really sleeping.
Yes.
It makes it sound kind of cool.
Yeah, so you're just as cynical as me now. It actually makes me laugh because it's so obscene, right? And then what's the other word in there that's?
Prostitutes.
Yes. Yep. Prostitutes are driven in, right? So what does that term prostitute connotate?
That they're volunteers.
Right, yeah. Oldest profession in the history of mankind, right? So it's a little inconsistent, that caption, but it makes us think, right? And think about when we're reading and disseminating the information that's put in front of us, again, to always, take that moment and think about, okay, what is really going on here? What is really going on? So how can this happen to people? How can this victimization happen? Just like a lot of other things, there's the push factors and the pull factors. Okay, and basically boils down to vulnerabilities, and the perpetrators either acknowledging those vulnerabilities and using them, or creating them. Okay, so it's poverty, wish for a better life on the other side, social factors, they might have past sex abuse for themselves, ethnic discrimination, and it could be just someone in the wrong place at the wrong time. Okay? Now we're not going to go into the Liam Neeson movie, maybe that can happen. But it's usually not getting off the plane in Europe and getting in the van because some guys tell you to. Okay, so once they're in that situation, whether it's cleaning the store at Walmart, or stuck in that brothel in Poughkeepsie, why don't they leave? Okay, so again, if we look at other issues, that domestic violence, with the whole football thing and hashtag why she leave or why she stay or whatever it was, it's the same kind of thing in a human trafficking situation. So they might be captive and confined. Okay, there was a case in New Hampshire where 2 men were brought up from Jamaica by a forester. Okay, this was actually one of the first labor trafficking cases prosecuted anywhere. And this forester brought these guys up, and he had them living in a shack in the woods in New Hampshire. Okay, he had dogs guarding them, he threatened them with a gun, he didn't give them the right safety equipment, and they were out logging and doing things that they were not trained to do, and it was very dangerous. And a neighbor happened to figure out what was going on, and so they were able to investigate and give services to those men. So they were actually confined. There might be frequent, if not constant, accompaniment, okay, and that can be with domestic servitude, where you're the maid or nanny in the house, and you're stuck in the house for most of the day. Maybe you're allowed to go out to get the mail. Maybe they'll bring you to church or the store every once in a while, but they're constantly with you. Likewise, in street prostitution or online prostitution, the trafficker / pimp might just be monitoring you over the phone, okay? So now there's this whole thing, everybody's obsessed with their phones. But again, in the healthcare setting or other first responders, if there's a person and they are even more obsessed or even getting nervous if they're not able to respond on the phone, the person might just be, hey, are you making your quota? What are you doing now? Where are you, right? And it's that kind of control. So threat of violence, fear of physical retaliation to you or your family back home. All right, addiction. Tracy and Matt are going to definitely get into that a little later. But addiction is a form of, or manipulating someone's addiction is a form of coercion. There's federal case law on that now, okay? So if someone knows that there's an addict or they create an addiction in someone and they say, you go do this or else you're not going to get your next hit, fix, whatever you want to call it, okay? And that person's so scared of being dope sick or getting withdrawal symptoms that they'll go do whatever they need to do. Okay? Then you've got the shame and self-blame. Okay? You're in the situation at some point, maybe you made a choice that got you halfway along to being trafficked, so you think it's your fault. And so then again, you don't want to say anything. You don't want to report. Traumatic bonding, so Stockholm syndrome. And then just normalization. You know, it's a good day if you only have to sleep with 10 people, 10 clients, 10 Johns, buyers, whatever you're going to call them. Okay? And so that's good. Or maybe you got a candy bar that day instead of just, the rest of someone else's meal. And that's your life. So what we want to have, and what we're trying to do in Vermont for sure, and around the world, is really have that human rights approach to human trafficking and addressing this issue. So no harm to people. Focusing on the situation, the needs and rights of the person, okay? Respects their autonomy. Again, to try to minimize that self-blame and guilt. To be empowering and non-judgmental to victims. And then connect the rights of the individual to prosecution of the traffickers if we can. Okay? All right. That is the 101. A little intro.
Yeah, let's take a quick break.
Anyone have any questions though? On slavery or trafficking? All right.